The Wandering Earth is a Chinese sci-fi blockbuster with a limited release in Australia, and I'm assuming the States as well. I want to thank my friend who gave me the opportunity to see it last week by paying for my ticket and my transport to Sydney because it's not showing in my city. As I said, it's a limited release. So thank you to her. I saw it in the cinema by myself, and I don't do that very often, but almost every time I have, it's been a really memorable experience. I've just seen a bunch of good movies by myself in the cinema before. This one was memorable in a different way, not because it was particularly bad, but what was interesting about this film was that parts of it were so blockbustery, like seeing The Avengers or something, and parts of it were so amateurish, so like seeing The Room. I liked the premise of the film. It's quite interesting. The sun has expanded to a size at which it will soon engulf the Earth, and so to avoid that fate, the Earth must be propelled out of our solar system to the nearest star, which is Proxima Centauri, which is 4.2 light years away, but at the speed that the Earth can be propelled, that's going to take a really long time. This is a very visual film. We've got a lot of CG and special effects to show this sci-fi world that they're setting up. In particular, I liked the shots of the Earth being sort of propelled through space by these jet thrusters, particularly when it's like going past Jupiter. Those bits look really good. Some other bits look quite good as well. But then, be warned, parts of it are hilariously bad. Like, it's almost like they just ran out of money at a certain point, and you see these things that, like, I haven't seen effects that bad since my dad showed me Journey to the Center of the Earth, which I think is a 1956 sci-fi film. The sound overall was very good. Obviously, it's a sci-fi movie. There's a lot of explosions and those kinds of effects. There's also a pretty hefty orchestral score, both of which are very good. Throughout the whole film, as a technical aspect, the sound was probably the best overall element. Parts of the score felt very ripped off from other American sci-fi movies, and like, I mean particular ones. I don't mean that they're just going for that feel, that's fairly obvious, but I mean like Stephen Price's score for Gravity. One scene felt almost like an homage to Gravity because we had visuals and sound at the same time that looked exactly like that film. I can understand that. That's not really a criticism. If you're going to be breaking ground for your country as a whole, then I can understand the need to look at the canon of American sci-fi, particularly good American sci-fi, and go, let's just do that as best we can. And if I were going to rip off a sci-fi score, if I was the film composer, I would probably use Gravity as well. Well, actually no, I would use Arrival, but this film is more in line with Gravity. So those things were good, and thanks to those elements, I had a good time. I enjoyed this movie enough that those things kept me interested enough to keep watching, I guess. However, the writing was bad. The characters in particular, they were really lacking. The movie starts with this onslaught of information, a voiceover style of just this is happening and this is happening and this is happening, and that's totally understandable. We're seeing movies do that more often, I think, but the trade-off for that is that we then get to go straight into the story and learn about our characters and why we should care about them, rather than seeing a 20-minute outplaying of the premise of the film. We get the premise of the film in like 3 or 4 minutes, and then we can spend all that time developing our characters. Sadly, this movie did not do that. It starts with the onslaught of information, but then it spends 20 to 30 minutes just bumbling about. After 30 minutes, I felt like the only thing I really knew about our main character was that he hadn't seen his dad since he was little. But unlike, say, Interstellar, we're not given any scenes to show us why we should care that he hasn't seen his dad. He's basically just a random person, and his dad is a stronger character. His dad was my favourite character and my favourite story of the film, but we just don't get to see the characters connecting, and we don't get to know enough about them that we feel like we should care. It might be tempting to think that you can put this down to a sort of Western versus Eastern sensibility thing, where I just don't care about the characters because I don't know as much about Chinese culture. But I don't think it's that, because there are lots of clues that suggest the filmmakers wanted us to feel like these characters were connected, but just didn't really know how to do that. We have some other characters, of course, but none of any real flesh and blood. They're just sort of there randomly. There's one guy that they try to give this personality. He's meant to be the comic relief in the film. He's meant to be half Australian, half Chinese, and he speaks this weird kind of Chinese that even I can hear is accented strangely. And he's meant to be funny, but he's just really, really grating. And it's not just because he's Australian or he's meant to be Australian. I just found all his lines and everything really bad, and his whole character was really annoying, and I actually just wanted someone to shoot him in the head already. Also, if there are any writers watching, stop writing Australian characters from Melbourne. It's so obvious that you've just picked the less famous of the two cities you know. Also, what you don't know about Melbourne is that it's 95% bogans and hipsters. So if your character isn't this guy or this guy, then they're probably not from Melbourne. Then there are heaps of characters who just turn up. We don't really know who they are or why they're there. They're just kind of like, oh, these guys are here now and they're important. And that leads me to the plot. Not the premise, the plot, the individual points of the story that lead us towards the conclusion of the film. This plot is all over the place. The objectives of each character will change once per almost scene, actually. Like, in one scene they'll be trying to do this, and then they'll get some radio message and they'll be like, oh no, scrap that, that doesn't matter anymore, go on to the next thing. And then they'll be like, oh no, yeah, actually we're doing this now. And the result of that is that whenever they're trying to do something in the film, like pull a truck out from under another heavier truck or something, you kind of go, why is this important again? And you never do get reminded, because a few seconds later, the goal for that character will change again. And there's just too many goals and too many characters and not enough cohesion. The only character and individual story that I felt like I could get behind was this guy. I'm not going to try and say his name. So he plays the father, and as I said, he was my favorite character. And his story is the only one that feels like it has a consistent arc and a consistent goal for the whole movie. And basically the movie was much more interesting when we were watching him than when we weren't watching him. Parts of his story, particularly his sort of final challenge to overcome, felt very derivative from other sci-fi films, but that's okay. It's just kind of funny because most of the sci-fi films that this film references are extremely highly regarded American films of the last kind of 50, 60 years. But the one that this particular scene reminded me the most of is not a sci-fi film. I'm not going to say what it is, but it's actually pretty funny when you think, yeah, that's kind of a kid's film. Just as a side note, I think it's worth mentioning that the English subtitles that you will see if you see it in the cinema are really, really bad. Some of the subtitles clearly say something that the character did not actually say. There's one scene where there's like stuff blowing up and people taking bullets and dying, and there's just stuff going everywhere, and this character calls out something quite desperate in Mandarin that I'm thinking was probably, "Are you okay?" And the subtitles just say, "How are you?" If you end up watching it on Blu-ray or put out by a television company in your country or something like that, I'm sure they'll have redone the subtitles and had a native English speaker write them. It was kind of hard to pin down where the third act of this film started, because as I said, the plot points turn so quickly that it always feels like you're watching the next big threat, and you think, could this be the threat that sort of is the final climax of the movie? But it's not. When we do get to the climax of the film, I actually enjoyed that part. I felt like that was when the film was at its most focused, and when we could take some time to actually enjoy what was happening on screen and get invested in the goal of these characters. The only problem with that third act is that it felt like we didn't really know that we were there for sure, because we had had so many mini third acts building up to that, that when we got there, we were like, oh no, this is it, I think. Like I said at the start, I went to more effort than I would normally go to watch a movie in order to watch this movie. I caught the train to Sydney and back just to watch this film, and I was happy to do that. However, if I had done that stuff just to see this movie because I thought it would be a masterpiece, then I would have been very, very let down. There's just too many bad characters and bad writing and messy plot points for it to be called anything other than okay. But overall, I had a good time in this movie. I liked it. I'd probably watch it again. I would recommend this film to anyone interested in Chinese language, Chinese cinema, obviously, or just cinema and its history in general. Because, like I said, this is not the first Chinese film. Obviously, it's not the first one we've gotten here in the West, but I think it's the first all Chinese, like fully Chinese cast, production crew, everything, film of this scale, of this kind of magnitude. And I don't think it's that great, as I've said, but I think it's an important film in paving the way, because there will be others, and it won't be that long, I don't think, before we get a masterpiece, like the one that makes everyone sit up and notice Chinese cinema. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, I think it was, there were 27 or something like that spaghetti westerns made before Sergio Leone made The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. Today we say The Good, the Bad and the Ugly was a very, very influential film, and that's true. But the first spaghetti western was also very influential because it paved the way for the next 25 or whatever it was before The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, and that came to influence cinema hugely. This film mightn't be the best film or even the most important film to come out in the next 5 years, but it may be very important in the fact that it paves the way for more Chinese blockbusters, and that could be a really interesting thing to happen in cinema over the next 5 years or so. Anyway guys, if you, like me, are interested in all things foreign language, movies, series, etc., then please comment so that I know you guys are out there. Subscribing also helps me to feel really encouraged and motivated to keep bringing you more of these reviews. Anyway, wherever you are and whatever language you speak, I really hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. 再见!